Welcome to Sound Signals. I'm your host, Zeb. Each episode, I speak with artists, curators, writers, and cultural practitioners about the ideas, processes, and questions shaping contemporary art today. For this conversation, I'm joined by artist and designer Luke Jenkins, founder of In Bloom Studio. Working between sculpture, furniture, and digital fabrication, Luke explores what happens when craftsmanship, technology, and ecology intersect. We discuss one of his latest exhibition, Build Break Bridge, the world experimentation in his practice and how materials can become active collaborators in the creative process. This is Living Structures. Hi, Luke. Thanks for joining me today.
Hey, you're welcome.
And your work often exists between furniture, sculpture, and installation. How do you decide when a piece wants to remain functional versus becoming something purely conceptual?
It's usually not really a conscious decision. When it makes sense to do one or the other is when it happens. And I don't know. That's a it's a difficult question to expound more upon just because it's more of just like a feeling of like when does it need to be a wall piece or a sculpture or a piece of furniture? They're all kind of the same to me, I guess the more something loses its functionality, the more freedom I have in whatever I want to do with it. And if I coming from a furniture background, if I do make something that is functional, I try my best to give it the function that it needs to have. And then if it's like a wall piece or a freestanding sculpture that doesn't necessarily have the same function, its function is, to exist as a piece of conceptual art or whatever that other function is. It's not meant to be sat on.
Awesome. That's wonderful. I like the idea of it just being organic and just letting it kind of just um be a part of the process. In the show Build Break Bridge, wood is emphasized as both your subject and collaborator. What has working with the same material over many years taught you that you couldn't have anticipated when you first began?
I mean, I never really worked with my hands. I went to school for furniture making. That's what my undergrad is in from RISD, and that was a very hands-on program. It was at that point like a very craft-oriented program. It wasn't more kind of like design-oriented, which it is today, from what I understand. And I hadn't really worked with my hands much before that, before I went to art school. And you know, there's like there isn't much that you're very wise in at that age, when you're like 18, you're going to school, you don't really understand how your body works that at that age, so like I would say probably the thing that I couldn't anticipate is just like understanding something as deeply as I understand wood right now. um I think that's like a wisdom that you never you never think to yourself like I've gotten to this point where oh I can finally understand this intuitively. It just kind of happens, and then you just know things. So it's like if someone asks me a question about wood, I can answer it without really thinking about it because it's just knowledge in my brain, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that it's such an interesting kind of process to work with whatever material because you feel like you know how it works, but then it just reveals a different story. So I really like that. But your practice combines like handcrafted techniques with CNC routing, laser cutting, and other digital fabrication methods. Rather than seeing these approaches as opposites, you embrace both. What interests you about this dialogue between technology and craftsmanship?
Um, I mean, they're kind of the same thing to me, right? Like you can talk about the CNC router you the same way you talk about a table saw or even just like a chisel. It's technology of some kind. Otherwise we'd be clawing at wood with our fingernails, and it's just a progression of possibilities of like how to think about working with wood. Like my artwork and my furniture, my woodworking before I started getting into digital fabrication like laser cutting and CNC routing, um, was very much still, I used machines to make it, but it was very much more like handmade and um, still about ecologies. And I kind of took a break from that when I started working with CNC, and a lot of it became much more about the process of the digital to the physical and trying to create my own visual language because like a if you're doing craft-based woodworking, you can do carving with a chisel or an angle grinder or something like that. You can make straight lines with a table saw. You can make curves with a bandsaw. And when you start CNC routing, you can combine all of those different things into one machine and one process. So it opened up a lot of possibilities for me, and it made me kind of take a step back and really start to redefine um, what I wanted my work to look like and the processes I wanted to move through while making. Um, so I guess that it's not really so much of a dialogue from one to the other because I kind of see them all as the same thing. But I would definitely say that moving specifically into CNC routing over laser cutting or something like that definitely made me reconsider how I was making, and that led to new ways of things looking. So, for example, a- in the period where I first started CNC routing, a lot of my work became very geometrical because that's a process of, if you do graphic design or you do any 3D modeling or anything like that, you start working with pure forms, like circles, rectangles, and that sort of thing. And that's like the basis of your form work in the beginning. That's like the first tools that you start clicking when you're creating something, and then you start to manipulate it after that. And I would say that I wasn't working with a lot of circles before I got into CNC routing. I still stayed more rectilinear, or just carved things more like kind of biomorphic by hand. Um, and I used a lot of circles when I first started CNC routing, just because it's also one of the not challenging, but like maybe one of the more time consuming forms to make when you're using tools by hand. Like you can cut it out with a jigsaw or a bandsaw, but then you have to sand it, and you have to do this and the other. So I think that's one reason my work started out very curvy and circular when I first started making work on the CNC router.
Okay, that's great. It's such an interesting discourse between technology and craftsmanship because I think that a lot of people lend themselves to working with technology and that filtrates what they're making and it allows them to step away from their work and see it in a different way and allow maybe the craftsmanship becomes like a motif and I really enjoy that relationship. But many artists attempt to control every aspect of the creative process. But you've invited termites, weathering, fire, and other natural forces in your art. What attracts you to collaboration with processes that are fundamentally unpredictable?
Um, I find a lot of uh I don't know, like a lot of decisions are already made for me. It's kind of freeing working with something that's already defined like that, and then working with that, working off of it sometimes and then working with it at other times. But there are a lot of choices that have already been made for me in working with materials that have a history to them, and I would say kind of like working with uh termite eaten wood, termite marked wood could be comparable to working with like found furniture parts. If you get a bunch of legs that have already been made by another processor, another company, or you find some broken furniture by the side of the road or something, and do something with that. Uh, it's kind of similar. I'm thinking about it conceptually a little bit differently than that, but it definitely gives you a starting point to work from. And I think that that's very attractive, because for me, the hardest thing to do is like to start on something, like the worst thing I have would be like a blank piece of paper in front of me. And starting with a piece of paper that already has stuff on it is, I feel like very liberating.
Yeah. And it almost like gives you a sense of even control on like what you're making because you get to choose what you can essentially incorporate in your work and what doesn't. And it almost, like you said earlier, it becomes like this conceptual framework um, that allows for like maybe reading the work a little bit differently. And maybe like as a part of like your concept with ecology, and that really kind of opens up what art can be. It give it kind of different approach. But sustainability seems embedded in your practice, not simply through reclaimed materials, but through a philosophy of transformation. How has your education at Design Academy Edenhoven influenced the way you think about making today?
That was a program that was very self-directed. So everyone in the program had a very different understanding of what they wanted to achieve, while thinking about sustainability. And sustainability could be recycling. Sustainability could be working on intergenerational dynamics between families. There's a lot of things that work under that umbrella. So like sustainability is to sustain, right? Like, what are we sustaining? Are we sustaining the planet? Are we sustaining culture? Are we sustaining familial ties? Everyone in that program had a very different idea of what they wanted to focus on, and that had definitely an impact on me. I went in as a strong woodworker and a sculptor, and I ended up graduating. My thesis project was actually an iPad app. It was like a family calendar that created metadata through different events. So, for instance, if you had like a family dinner, everyone that's a part of that dinner could give it a rating or like write something about it. And it would take all of these aspects that came from the time and the event and the rating, or whatever people said about it, and took all of this metadata and turned them into games that were essentially reflections of going back in time, understanding each individual that was like part of this shared app, calendar, and also kind of how they interacted with the different people that were also using the app, and how they thought about specific types of events like dinners or different types of get-togethers and that sort of thing. And I think that I already had like a strong interest in um, kind of like the digital versus the physical and the internet and data, as well as a definite interest in intergenerational dynamics. But I think if I hadn't gone to a program that were that open, I wouldn't have gotten there, and like some of my teachers were like, Luke, what are you doing? You're a woodworker. Why are you making an iPad app? Like that's that's crazy. Focus on what your strengths are. But I think that it definitely allowed me a lot of different opportunities to think more broadly about my practice.
Yeah, that's really insightful in terms of like the way in which the school sets up the curriculum. And but your recent work appears increasingly interested in ecological systems and slow environmental change. Do you see your work as environmental advocacy, material research, or something else entirely?
Right now I'm working a lot with termites. So I'm interested in the West Indian drywood termite, which comes from the Atacama Desert in Chile, which is the driest place on Earth next to Antarctica. Um, and these are the termites that like, we have lots of termites in South Florida, but these are the ones that live in our houses with us. They can only live in the houses because they're surviving on wood that's been kiln dried, so there's very low moisture in it. Um, and that's only because they come from the desert that they can survive on such low moisture in the wood. And the show I have up at Belly Contemporary in Pompano right now called Carried Home kind of talks about their origins in the desert and how they eventually made their way here through the trading galleons from the conquistadors that were in Peru and Chile for the gold and silver trade and or not trade, but like, extraction. And eventually, came up through the Pacific across Panama into the Caribbean and like eventually made their way up into South Florida. And then talking a little bit more about the landscape of South Florida. So there's definitely um, there's definitely an interest in ecology as well as an interest in kind of how everything's interconnected. There are a lot of different types of ecologies. Definitely how this termite, which is an invasive species, is also a domesticated species. It can't survive outside of our houses. It's too moist. It'll like get moldy and it doesn't have like a lot of resistance against like high moisture environments. So it's kind of interesting how it's dependent on us so much just to keep spreading out throughout the world. And all of this is based, of course, in um, capitalism and the at that point especially the economics of kind of dominating other cultures and taking what people wanted to from them and they just kind of hitched a ride, probably through crates or furniture or whatever that they were already in, and kind of spread their way up around the rest of the world. So I'm interested in a lot of overlapping ecologies. There's also, the ecology of termites within South Florida and kind of even on a micro scale, like how they move from one house to another. They say like in South Florida, if you have a house, it's either gotten termites, it has termites, or it's going to have termites at some point. Like if you have any wood anywhere in it. And that's definitely how it goes. If like you see someone on your street tenting their house, your house probably is going to have termites in it, like if it doesn't already in a few years.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really interesting too.
Absolutely. No, the whole like tracing the evolution of the of termites is such an interesting kind of um, way to rethink history. And that's such a kind of I think important kind of topic to bring into your work. And I mean, I'm kind of interested. I want to learn more about how that kind of integrates into your work. Like, how do you? But I guess that could be another conversation. But throughout your career, you've exhibited, curated exhibitions, taught, and fabricated work for others through In Bloom Studio. How have these different roles informed your own artistic practice?
Um, I guess they've all, I'm definitely a specialist in woodworking, but it's definitely given me a lot of like a broader view of how I could approach things. I think like the more people you interact with and the more artwork that you experience, the more insight it gives you into your own stuff. Definitely, I'd say that. Teaching, I really enjoy teaching. Teaching has definitely helped me become a better communicator. But also, just like seeing how, given a certain topic or a very even precise project, like there's everyone in your class is going to approach it in a different way, and like I think that that's really interesting to see too, how everyone kind of has their own slant on things. And then from there, also, like if you're teaching the same course over time, you can start to see how, like, okay, yeah, there are a couple people who are always going to approach it this way if you're giving a similar project out and that sort of thing. Um, and that's really interesting to me. I'm really interested in these kind of micro and macro choices we make and how we approach different questions and different projects as well as different materials, like there are different things that people consistently see in a piece of wood as possibilities to, form the foundation of what they're going to make. If you give someone a 2x4, everyone's going to look at it a little bit differently, but there are going to be like certain themes that people just come back to over and over again. And I would definitely say that seeing that has given me a broader view of possibilities, and when I'm for like I told you before, like the worst thing for me is a blank piece of paper because I'm just like, is that right? You make one mark and you're like, did I make the right mark? And I think that teaching has given me the kind of insight to understand how many different marks can be made as that first mark, like how many different ways to approach things there are. And it's given me a lot more maybe possibilities in my own work.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I also resonate with what you were saying about teaching, or I resonate with what you said about teaching, seeing how um, students approach projects in a different way in their knowledge, like the knowledge they carry, I think, and the ability to kind of inquire as to what the assignment is or whatever they might kind of be unsure about or sure to complete whatever task is necessary for a project. It really, for me, it helps to understand how knowledge works and the process of learning is such an important um, process outside of school that you carry with you. And so it almost seems like this interest in ecology is one way to kind of explore knowledge and the knowledge that other organisms carry, because it's so important to understand like the world and reality. But
Yeah.
moving moving forward with your show at the South Florida Cultural Consortium exhibition at Mocha, North Miami, your termite carved lamp became part of a larger conversation about Florida's ecology. How do you think place, in particular South Florida, continues to shape your work?
I think it has a really big impact on it. Like my work, with the exception of when I was just kind of making circles for a little while, my work has definitely always been about the natural world surrounding me. And South Florida is just such a lush environment. There's so much that grows here, and there's um, so much that's seen as a concrete part of Florida. Um, like citrus to a slightly lesser extent in South Florida, although we still have it down here, but that's more like Central Florida, North Florida. But oranges are originally from China, and there's this kind of cross contamination and cross exchange that happens with different plants and animals in South Florida that I'm really interested in and kind of inspired by as well. So I would say that coming from the Northeast, especially, where we definitely have our own um, flora and fauna that's
Mm.
much more locked in. Like the flora and fauna that we have up in the Northeast it's been there for quite a while, and it feels like South Florida is a lot more in flux, which is interesting. There are a lot of overlapping ecologies that are happening down here, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just gives you kind of an idea of what we should protect, and what is in terms of like um capitalism and how the landscape itself can oftentimes be forgotten,
Mhm.
by through these systems of power. But so I find that very important. But your work often reveals like the marks of making rather than hiding them. Why is it important for your viewers to see evidence of construction, erosion, repair, or failure?
Um, I guess it's like I don't feel like it's important so much as it is like why is it important to hide it, Like it's all part of the process. My work is very process driven, and I think that anything that happens in getting from the beginning to the end deserves to be understood as well, by the viewer or the person who's experiencing it, either physically or visually. And I don't think that mixing process into a piece doesn't take anything away from the concept of it, even if they're both talking about slightly different things.
Yeah. No, and it gives you an idea of how fragile materials can be or what they can signify. And with that being said, looking ahead, what questions or material experiments are you most excited to pursue? And where do you hope your practice evolves over the next decade?
Um, I am hopeful to be able to continue to, experiment with new materials and new processes. Right now I'm really enjoying working with termite marked wood and kind of wood in decay in a lot of ways. And then on the other hand, I've been working with thermally modified wood, which is wood that's been heated up to around like 415 degrees Fahrenheit, and it burns out all of the sugars and other components in the wood that fungus would eat. So it essentially creates like an inert wood. It's not going to rot. It's because there's nothing for the fungus to eat in the wood. So you could have a piece of pine that's been thermally modified in South Florida, like no paint or oil, just outdoors for like 30 years, and it'll be perfectly fine. So there's there are different wood technologies that I'm interested in, and that's definitely one of them. On maybe the contrasting side from like working with found materials that have history and decay. These are these materials that are more like locked in time, I guess you could say. It kind of freezes it on a cellular level. So if it's perfectly flat, it's going to stay perfectly flat, and it's not going to warp and move around as much as wood normally does. Like with expansion and contraction, it just like locks all of that in place. And both of those are I was able to work a lot with the thermally modified wood as well as all of this termite wood by getting Broward Innovation grants for both of those projects. So I'm definitely looking forward to working with more materials, um, you know, getting more grants, I guess, would be part of the 10-year plan. I'm going to be kind of growing the business out. In Bloom Studio, my fiance Lisa Stevens is coming on board in a few weeks, and we're going to be focusing a lot more on the art side of things, and still like doing fabrication for other artists and building custom furniture and stuff like that, but definitely also finding new avenues to make art and sculpture that are our own as well. So in terms of the 10-year plan, um, we're definitely focusing more on installation sculptures and public and semi-public installations.
Wonderful. And with that being said, can you remind everyone like when your show closes so everyone can go take a
Yeah,
look?
it's at Belly Contemporary up in Pompano. There are two shows right now. There's Build Break Bridge, which is a retrospective of the past like 9 years of my work. That is curated by Luna Goldberg from the Wolfsonian. And there's also Carried Home, which is the public exhibition of the work I've been doing with termites and termite marked wood. And they're both up until September 12th.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time and, carving out some time to join me here today. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Had a really good time.
Thanks.